A former player just called his own team a clown show. And that might be the moment everything finally starts to unravel. Because when that kind of comment comes from inside the league, not just fans, not just analysts, it hits differently. It raises a question nobody can ignore anymore. What's really going on behind the scenes? And suddenly, all eyes are back on one name, Kevin Stefanski. For a while, the criticism around him felt scattered. A bad decision here, a questionable call there, something fans argued about on social media and then moved on from. But now, it's starting to stack up, and when former players begin to speak out, even indirectly, it stops looking like random frustration and starts looking like a pattern. What makes this even more intense is the timing. Because this isn't just about the past anymore. This isn't just about Cleveland. The same conversations, the same complaints, the same uneasy feeling is now following him into a completely new situation with the Atlanta Falcons. And if you've been paying attention, you can already see the cracks forming. Fans are noticing it, players are reacting to it, and online, the noise is getting louder by the day. There's been a lot of buzz surrounding how certain quarterbacks were handled, especially ShedeurSanders. Rumors have been circulating, with people questioning whether he was ever truly given a fair shot. Some say he was held back. Others believe there was favoritism behind the scenes. Nothing officially confirmed, but enough moments have surfaced to make people wonder. And that's the thing about situations like this. You don't need one massive scandal for everything to fall apart. All it takes is a series of small decisions that don't quite make sense, moments that feel off, choices that leave players, fans, and even insiders asking the same question over and over again. Why? Why pull a quarterback when he's finding his rhythm? Why create competition where stability is needed? Why does it feel like the system itself is working against the very players it's supposed to elevate? Those questions didn't go away. They followed. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. And now, they've landed in Atlanta. What's happening right now isn't just another off-season storyline. It's something bigger, something that feels like it's building toward a breaking point. Because when a locker room starts to lose confidence, even slightly, it doesn't take long before everything else starts slipping too. And here's the part that should really have fans paying attention. This might only be the beginning. Because if the same patterns are repeating, if the same frustrations are quietly growing behind the scenes, then what we're seeing right now is just the surface. The real story. That might be a whole lot deeper and a whole lot messier than anyone expected. It didn't start with a press conference. It didn't start with a breaking news alert. It started in the comments. A simple back and forth online, until it suddenly wasn't so simple anymore. When Elijah Wilkinson stepped in, the tone shifted instantly. Fans had already been venting, throwing around frustration like they always do during uncertain times. But this felt different. This wasn't just noise from the outside. This was someone who had actually been in the system. And he didn't hold back. At first, it looked like a casual reaction, maybe even a joke. But the deeper you looked, the more it felt like something else entirely. The kind of comment that comes from built-up frustration. The kind that doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Because players don't usually jump into situations like this unless something been bothering them for a while. And that's what made people stop scrolling. Suddenly, fans weren't just arguing anymore, they were analyzing. Breaking down every word, every reply, every subtle hint. Trying to figure out what was really being said without being said directly. Because in the NFL, things are rarely as direct as they seem. You don't always get full explanations. You get glimpses, reactions, moments that slip through the cracks. And this was one of those moments. What really caught attention wasn't just the comment itself. It was how easily it connected with everything people had already been feeling. The frustration, the confusion, the sense that something behind the scenes just wasn't clicking the way it should. It was like Wilkinson didn't introduce a new idea, he confirmed one. And once that happens, it's hard to ignore. Because now it's not just fans speculating. It's someone with real experience hinting that the issues might be deeper than anyone thought. And just like that, the conversation changed. People started revisiting old situations, old games, old decisions that didn't make sense at the time, moments that were brushed off before suddenly looked a lot more questionable. Why did certain players get pulled at key moments? Why did the offense feel inconsistent, even when the talent was there? Why did it always feel like something was slightly off? Those questions were always there, but now they had fuel. And once a narrative like that starts building, it spreads fast. What's even more interesting is what didn't happen. There was no immediate shutdown, no strong denial, no clear pushback that completely erased the doubts. Just silence. And in situations like this, silence doesn't calm things down, it makes everything louder. Because when nobody steps in to clarify, people start filling in the gaps themselves. And that's exactly what happened. What started as a single moment quickly turned into a larger conversation about leadership, trust, and what's really happening behind closed doors. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because the more people dug into it, the more they realized this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just one frustrated player speaking out. It might have been the first visible crack, but it definitely wasn't the only one. To understand why everything feels like it's spiraling now, you have to go back to where the doubts first started. And that takes us straight to Cleveland. At the time, nothing seemed completely out of control. The team had talent. The expectations were there. On paper, it looked like a situation that just needed consistency to click. But week after week, something didn't quite line up, and most of it centered around one position. Quarterback. That's where the spotlight slowly shifted onto ShedeurSanders. There's been a lot of buzz online about how that situation was handled, with fans speculating that Shedeur wasn't given the kind of opportunity most quarterbacks need to truly settle into a system. Short stretches on the field, sudden changes in rotation, moments where it felt like he was just starting to find rhythm, and then, just like that, he was pulled back. Now, to be clear, teams rotate players for all kinds of reasons. Matchups, strategy, long-term planning. But what made this situation stand out was how inconsistent it felt from the outside looking in. One drive would show promise. The next moment, everything would reset. And for a position that thrives on confidence and continuity, that kind of instability raises questions fast. Fans started noticing it first. Then analysts began bringing it up in conversations. Clips started circulating. Breakdowns started appearing. And the same question kept popping up over and over again. What's the plan here? Because when there's a clear direction, even tough decisions make sense. But when the direction feels unclear, every decision gets scrutinized. And that's exactly what happened. Some reports claimed that there was a preference toward other options on the roster. Others suggested it was part of a larger evaluation strategy. Nothing officially confirmed, but the speculation kept growing because the results weren't answering anything. Instead, they added more confusion. What made it even more complicated was the timing of certain decisions. Key moments in games where momentum was shifting, only for things to suddenly change. For fans watching, it didn't feel like adjustments, it felt like interruptions. And that's where the trust started to crack. Because once players and fans start questioning whether performance alone is enough to stay on the field, everything changes. It's no longer just about execution, it becomes about perception. Who's really getting the opportunity? Who's being held back? And why? Those questions didn't come with clear answers, and that silence created space for speculation to take over. The more people talked about it, the more it felt like something bigger was going on beneath the surface. Not necessarily one massive issue, but a series of small decisions that, when stacked together, painted a picture that didn't sit right. And here's the key part. At the time, it was easy to dismiss it as just a complicated season. Every team has them. Every coach faces criticism at some point. But looking back now, it feels less like a rough patch and more like the beginning of a pattern. Because once you start seeing the same types of decisions repeat themselves, in different moments, with different players, it stops looking random and starts looking intentional. And that realization is exactly why everything happening now feels so much bigger than just one situation. At first, it was easy to brush everything off as a rough stretch. Every coach has questionable calls. Every team goes through moments where nothing seems to click. That's just part of football. But what started happening next made it harder and harder to treat this like a one-time situation. Because the same types of concerns kept showing up. Different games, different moments, same confusion. And once people began connecting those dots, the conversation completely changed. It wasn't just fans anymore. Analysts started pointing it out. Former players hinted at it. Discussions started popping up across shows, podcasts, and social media. Not loud accusations, but consistent questions that all circled back to the same issue. Why does this keep happening? There's been a growing wave of talk suggesting that the system itself might be part of the problem. Reports claim that certain decisions, especially around key positions, felt less about performance and more about preference. Again, nothing officially confirmed. But when the same type of speculation keeps resurfacing, it starts to carry weight. Because patterns don't form out of nowhere. Take the quarterback situation, for example. It wasn't just one instance of rotation. It was how often it happened, and when it happened. Moments where consistency could have built momentum instead turned into resets. And that kind of instability doesn't just affect one player, it affects the entire offense. Receivers adjust differently. Linemen respond differently. The rhythm of the game shifts. Everything becomes reactive instead of controlled. And that's where the real concern started to grow. Because teams that win consistently usually have one thing in common: clarity. Clear roles, clear leadership, clear direction. But what people were seeing didn't feel clear at all. It felt unpredictable. And unpredictability can be dangerous in a locker room. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Because once players start second-guessing the system, it creates hesitation. And hesitation, especially at the professional level, can be the difference between winning and falling apart. There were also growing discussions around communication. Subtle hints that not everyone was on the same page, that decisions made on the sidelines weren't always translating smoothly onto the field. Again, these are conversations, not confirmed facts. But they didn't come from just one source. They came from multiple angles, all pointing in a similar direction. And when that happens, it becomes harder to ignore. What really pushed things over the edge, though, was how these concerns didn't fade away over time. They followed. Even after the season moved on, even after rosters shifted, the same questions stayed alive. The same doubts kept resurfacing, and instead of being resolved, they seemed to carry forward into new situations. That's when the word pattern started being used more seriously. Not as an exaggeration, but as a warning. Because one isolated issue can be fixed. Two can be explained. But when it keeps happening, across different moments with different players, it starts to look like something deeper. Something built into the way things are being run. And now, as everything unfolds in a new environment, people aren't just reacting to what's happening in the moment anymore. They're watching for what they've already seen before. And that changes everything. Because once a pattern is recognized, it's almost impossible to unsee it. Now everything shifts to a new city, a fresh start, and a roster that was supposed to be heading in the right direction. But the moment Atlanta Falcons stepped into this new chapter, something felt familiar, and not in a good way. At first, it was subtle. A few confusing decisions. A couple of mixed signals coming out of the organization. Nothing dramatic enough to cause panic, but just enough to make people pause and wonder if history might be repeating itself. Because if you've been following closely, you start to recognize the signs early. The same kind of uncertainty. The same lack of clear direction. The same feeling that something behind the scenes isn't fully aligned. And just like in Cleveland, it didn't take long for the outside noise to grow. Fans began questioning the approach, not aggressively at first, more like cautious curiosity. But as more reports and reactions started circulating, that curiosity slowly turned into concern. Because when expectations are high, patience runs thin. This isn't a rebuilding team with nothing to lose. This is a roster with real potential, players who can make plays, pieces that on paper should fit together. So when things start feeling off this early, it stands out. And then came the reactions from inside, or at least, what people believe are glimpses of it. Comments, subtle hints, and online interactions started fueling the narrative that not everything is running smoothly. Nothing directly confirmed, but enough chatter to make people pay attention. Because locker rooms don't usually leak energy like this unless something, building internally. You can feel it in the way conversations are shifting. Instead of talking about game plans and development, people are talking about tension, about roles, about decisions that don't seem fully locked in. And that's where the real concern kicks in. Because instability doesn't always show up on the scoreboard first, it shows up in confidence. Players start second-guessing, timing gets affected, communication slips just enough to make a difference, and once that happens, it becomes harder to recover momentum. What makes this situation even more intense is the expectation that this was supposed to be a reset. A chance to move forward. Instead, it's starting to feel like a continuation. Not in terms of results yet, but in terms of energy. And energy matters more than people think. It determines how players respond to adversity, how they trust the system, how they buy into what's being built. Right now, that buy-in doesn't look fully secure. And when that foundation isn't solid, even the most talented teams can struggle to find consistency. The most telling part: we're still early. This isn't late-season frustration. This isn't the result of months of losses piling up. This is happening at the beginning. Which means if these concerns are real, if the same patterns are quietly forming again, then this situation has the potential to grow into something much bigger. Because small cracks at the start of a season don't stay small for long. They spread. And if no one steps in to fix them early, they turn into fractures that are impossible to ignore. That's why people are watching Atlanta so closely right now. Not just to see how they play, but to see if they can avoid becoming the next chapter in a story that already feels way too familiar. And then came the situation that always changes everything: the quarterbacks. Because no matter how talented a roster looks, no matter how strong the defense or how deep the playbook is, if the quarterback room isn't stable, the entire team feels it. That's exactly where things in Atlanta started to get complicated. Instead of a clear starter being established early, the Atlanta Falcons leaned into full competition. On the surface, that sounds like the right move. Let everyone battle it out, let the best player win. But when names like Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix Jr. are involved, expectations shift. These aren't unknown players trying to prove they belong. These are quarterbacks who need rhythm, structure, and most importantly, clarity. And right now, clarity is exactly what's missing. The messaging coming out has been consistent. Nobody has the job yet. Everyone is competing. Every position is open. Again, that sounds fair. But critics are starting to question whether this approach actually helps or quietly creates more problems. Because we've seen how these situations can play out. Quarterback competitions can push players to perform at their highest level, or they can split focus, divide attention, and slow down development. It all depends on how it's managed. And that's where the concern comes in. There's been a lot of talk suggesting that this isn't just about competition, it's about control, about keeping the room in constant motion instead of locking in a direction. Some reports claim that when quarterbacks don't know where they stand, it affects everything. Decision-making slows down. Confidence takes a hit. Even small mistakes start to feel bigger because there's more pressure attached to every snap. And in a league where timing is everything, that hesitation can cost games. What makes this even more intense is how familiar it feels. Fans who followed earlier situations are starting to notice similarities. Rotations, unclear roles, moments where momentum could be built, but instead, things reset. Now again, none of this is officially confirmed as a problem. Teams run competitions all the time. But the difference here is perception. Because once players and fans start questioning whether there's a clear plan, every move gets scrutinized. Why this quarterback on this drive? Why switch now? Why not commit? Those questions don't just stay outside. They can creep into the locker room too. And that's when things get messy. Because quarterbacks aren't just another position. They set the tone for the entire offense. They lead the huddle. They control the pace. And when their role isn't fully defined, it creates a ripple effect across the field. Receivers struggle to build chemistry. Linemen adjust to different styles. The offense never fully settles into a rhythm. And suddenly, what started as healthy competition starts to feel like controlled chaos. That's the line Atlanta is walking right now. And if they don't find balance soon, if they don't turn this competition into clarity, it could spiral into the exact kind of instability people are already worried about. Because in the NFL, you don't just need talent at quarterback. You need certainty. And right now, certainty is the one thing this situation doesn't have. And this is where the conversation takes a deeper turn, because now it's no longer just about rotations or reps or who starts on Sunday. Now it's about philosophy. What actually matters more, control or winning? From the outside, everything happening with the Atlanta Falcons can still be explained as strategy. Competition can sharpen players. Uncertainty can push effort. Keeping everyone on edge can, in theory, raise the level of performance. But critics are starting to ask a different question. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. At what point does that approach stop helping and start hurting? Because there's been a growing belief, again, based on speculation and discussion, that the system in place might prioritize control over consistency. That instead of building around what works, it constantly resets the structure to maintain authority. Nothing confirmed, no official statement proving that. But when similar concerns keep appearing, people start to look at the bigger picture. Think about it. Winning teams usually simplify things as the season progresses. They identify their strengths, lock in their leaders, and build momentum through repetition and trust. They don't keep everything in flux. They don't keep their most important positions uncertain week after week. And yet, what's being discussed around this situation feels like the opposite. There's a sense that no one is fully secure, that roles can shift at any moment, that even strong performances might not guarantee stability. And that creates a very specific kind of pressure. Not the pressure to perform, but the pressure to constantly prove you belong. Now, some players thrive in that environment. But for others, it can be draining. Because instead of focusing on executing at a high level, they're thinking about their place on the team, their next opportunity, their next mistake. And in a league where margins are razor-thin, that mental shift can be costly. This is where the conversation around Kevin Stefanski gets more intense. Not because of one decision, but because of the perception that the system might revolve too heavily around maintaining control, over rotations, over roles, over narratives, rather than locking in what gives the team the best chance to win right now. Again, perception. But perception shapes reality in sports faster than almost anything else. If players start believing that performance alone isn't the deciding factor, trust begins to slip. And once trust slips, everything else follows. Communication gets strained. Energy shifts. Confidence drops, quietly at first, then all at once. And suddenly, a talented roster starts playing below its potential without any obvious reason. That's the risk Atlanta is facing. Not a lack of skill, not a lack of opportunity, but a lack of alignment between what players expect and how decisions are being made. Because at the end of the day, every team has to answer one simple question. What are we actually building toward? If the answer is clear, players buy in. If it's not, they start questioning. And right now, the biggest concern is what's happening on the field. It's whether everyone off the field is chasing the same goal. Because if control becomes the priority instead of winning, the results usually speak for themselves. And not in a good way. And this is where everything starts to feel a lot more serious, because now we're not just talking about confusion or competition or even coaching philosophy. We're talking about risk. The kind of risk that doesn't show up immediately, but builds quietly until it's impossible to ignore. For the Atlanta Falcons, the biggest danger right now isn't losing a single game or making one bad decision. It's the possibility of wasting an entire season of potential. Because on paper, this team has what most organizations spend years trying to build: talent in key positions, depth across the roster, and players who are capable of changing games in a single moment. That's not the issue. The issue is whether that talent will actually be put in a position to succeed. There's been growing conversation suggesting that when systems feel unstable, even the best players can struggle to perform at their highest level. Not because they lack ability, but because the environment around them isn't allowing them to fully settle in. Timing gets thrown off. Confidence starts to dip. Execution becomes inconsistent. And suddenly, a team that should be dangerous starts looking average. That's how it begins. Not with a collapse, but with small drops in performance that slowly add up. And by the time it's noticeable, it's already too late. What makes this situation even more concerning is how familiar the warning signs feel. Unclear roles, constant adjustments, a sense that things are still being figured out instead of being locked in. Individually, none of those are deal breakers. But together, they create instability. And instability is the one thing winning teams can't afford. Because once it spreads, it affects everything. The locker room starts to feel it first. Players may not say it publicly, but internally questions start forming. About direction, about decisions, about whether everyone is truly on the same page. And when those questions don't get clear answers, they turn into doubt. Not loud, obvious doubt. Quiet doubt. The kind that shows up in hesitation, in missed opportunities, in moments where players second-guess instead of reacting. And in the NFL, hesitation is enough to lose games. There's also the long-term impact to consider. If this situation doesn't stabilize, it doesn't just affect one season, it affects development. Young players lose valuable time adjusting to inconsistency. Veterans lose trust in the system, and potential future pieces might start looking elsewhere. That's how teams lose momentum without even realizing it. And here's the reality Atlanta has to face. They're not starting from zero. They're starting with expectations, which means the margin for error is smaller. Fans aren't waiting for a rebuild. They're expecting progress. They're expecting results. And if those results don't come, the spotlight gets even brighter. The pressure increases, and every decision becomes magnified. That's the real risk. Not just losing, but falling short in a way that raises even more questions about the direction of the team. Because if everything people are speculating about turns out to have some truth to it, then this isn't just a temporary issue. It's a structural one. And those are the hardest to fix. That's why this moment matters so much. Because Atlanta isn't just deciding who starts at quarterback or how to run their offense. They're deciding what kind of team they're going to be, and whether they can avoid becoming the next example of potential that never turned into results. And now, everything comes down to a single decision. Not next month, not halfway through the season. Right now. Because what the Atlanta Falcons choose to do from this point forward won't just shape a few games. It could define the entire direction of the franchise. All the noise, all the speculation, all the questions surrounding Kevin Stefanski, it's all building toward this moment. Do they stay the course? Or do they recognize the warning signs early enough to change it? Because history in the NFL has shown one thing over and over again. Teams that ignore early cracks rarely fix them later. They grow. They spread. And by the time they're addressed, the damage is already done. Right now, Atlanta still has time. Time to create clarity. Time to establish leadership. Time to turn what looks like confusion into something controlled and focused. But that window doesn't stay open for long. Because once the season gets rolling, everything speeds up. Every game matters more. Every mistake gets magnified. And every unresolved issue starts to show up when it matters most. That's when pressure takes over. And pressure reveals everything. This is also where perception becomes reality. If players believe in the system, they play faster, more confidently, more freely. If they do, even the simplest plays start breaking down. That's why this decision isn't just about strategy, it's about trust. Do the players trust the direction? Do they believe roles are earned fairly? Do they feel like the system is built to help them succeed, or constantly test them? Those answers will determine how this team performs more than any playbook ever could. And then there's the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about Atlanta. The entire league is watching. Fans are watching. Analysts are watching. Even players on other teams are paying attention to how this unfolds. Because situations like this don't stay contained, they become examples. Examples of what works, or what doesn't. And if things go the wrong way, this won't just be remembered as a tough season. It'll be remembered as a missed opportunity. A moment where a team with real potential couldn't get out of its own way. But here's the twist. That outcome isn't locked in yet. It's still being written. Atlanta still has the chance to flip the narrative, to turn doubt into momentum, to take everything people are questioning right now and prove it wrong. But to do that, they have to make a choice. A real one. Not one based on ego. Not one based on control. One based on what actually gives them the best chance to win. Because in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Wins. Results. Proof. And if they get this decision right, everything changes. If they do, then everything people are worried about right now won't just be speculation anymore.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.